Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukie Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you have not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. If you wish to testify, please also fill out a yellow comment card. So we are in a unique situation where we do not have quorum, so I am going to bounce around the agenda a little bit. We will do our minutes and we do have quorum. Denny, do you have any informational items for us?
I don't have any informational items for you.
All right, way to break down the time there, Denny.
But we can move into the later in the agenda and talk a bit about the comp plan process.
All right, so I'll go down the list here real quick, and because I think everybody in the audience is here for one particular reason, but I will ask that. Audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be time for comments after the presentation. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? All right, so we'll move on to work session items, and we're going to start off with 6.2, which is the comprehensive plan update. Wow, haven't seen this since 1970.
So this is the hand-drawn flow chart as opposed to the computer-drawn flow chart, and that's what happens when I have to do it. David has had an extended time doing on a grand jury for really the last month, and we wanted to get wanted to make some progress on the process for the comp plan. One of the things that's going on right now is we've run a process to invite advisory committee members, as you know, to apply to get appointed to the comp plan advisory committee, and the council is expected to make appointments at their meeting on the 17th. So that I think that staff report just got posted tonight, but they have 15 names of people who had applied and were selected through a voting process. Kim was one of the people that would be appointed, but as outside of that 15. So there were liaisons from Planning Commission and 2 liaisons from the council that wanted to participate. So that's an ongoing step. The thing that we sort of needed to do was plot out how are we approaching this plan. We've got a lot of work to do. Council would like us to try to complete in 2 years. So how do you take on this type of process? So this flow chart is intended to kind of explain that. So I'll try to walk through this in a way that helps to explain it. There's a timeline across the bottom that's a 2-year timeline in yellow, and then a series of meetings, community events are shown by the little asterisks. But what I think the key to this chart are these 3 work blocks that are identified. There's block 1, block 2, and block 3. Each of those blocks of work are intended to take about 6 months, and they include different elements of the plan, and they would all follow the process that's outlined right below the title, Milwaukie Comprehensive Plan, where there's updating a background element, there's policy analysis, there's some alternatives related to those policies or mapped, there's a selection of a policy, and then review and refinement. So if you look at this, I was just going through that process right there. If you look at each of these blocks and then go down to the advisory committee, it's anticipated there would be 5 advisory committee meetings for each block, and we would be going through that process at the advisory committee meeting. So 5 meetings, 5 tasks there. It means being really efficient because there's a lot of information in there. In that first block, we'd be dealing with the economic section of the plan and the EOA that was done last year. It would deal with updating the public involvement section, section on community culture, which would include the arts, the character of the community, and then an update about annexation program and urban growth management. So what you see here is one of these elements that crosses 2 blocks. This was an idea that came out of the vision. It was the idea of developing some neighborhood nodes. So this is anticipated to be a project that starts here with sort of the economy and moves into a discussion about housing, continuing over a year-long process. It's anticipated that we would have a meeting, 2 meetings with each of the neighborhoods, so that's 14 neighborhood meetings to identify how those would work. But going back into block 1 for a second, the NMIA process and the economic opportunities analysis feed into that. That's some work that's already been done. Here in block 2, you'd have the council's affordable housing work, a study about cottage clusters that's going on, and the council's climate action plan would feed into that second block of work. Those are all things that are underway right now. So then in block 2, I think the big piece is housing. There'd be some updates to all these different elements, including Willamette Greenway, hazards, Parks and Rec. Block 3 is dealing with public facilities, natural resources, environmental quality, and urban design. So after we get through those 3 blocks of work, we need to synthesize it all that information into the plan itself. So the idea was to organize this much around some of the ideas that were in the vision. So there were 5 super actions in the vision, one dealing with resiliency, transportation, housing and neighborhoods, business and economy, and then community culture. So that'll provide a framework to build the plan around. The other thing that came out of the visioning process is the idea of applying a quadruple bottom line to the process. So it's a set of sustainability filters that consider people, planet, place, and prosperity. So as we go through this plan process, evaluating the different policies, we would look at how that relates to the vision. So pulling the vision in to each of those steps. Finally, there's stuff we're not going to get to in a 2-year period. So if we're adopting in 2 years, the code work that comes out of this is going to have to follow up. We think that there'll be a separate TSP update, Transportation Systems Plan update that will follow. Some of the basic inventory work may need to follow. Ideally, in a planning process, you do all your inventory work up front. We've got a natural resources inventory. We've got a historic resources inventory. We know there are mistakes in some of them, but they're not things that change the policy direction. So we might want to pick up and update some of those inventories. We might be able to start some of that work earlier, but we don't necessarily have to have that finished before we do this. I think it's more important to kind of take on that policy piece rather than do those. So that's the basic framework structure that we've outlined at this point. there needs to be a more detailed sort of task structure tied to dates that need to be done. This is pretty loose. We're going to have some consultant help for components of this. The neighborhood node piece, I think, is going to be, we're going to have some consultant help. I'm thinking that our having a facilitator, much like we had for the visioning work, was very helpful in terms of moving the process along. So we'll have a facilitator help with all of the CPAC meetings. This also includes like 4 major community events, 1 in each block, and then 1 during the synthesis stage. I think that's also a way to invite people in. And then the other thing was this little, I didn't have any better place to put this. There was a gap there, so that's where it went. But that says underrepresented communities, and it really initially said underrepresent communities, and that's not what I really meant. But so we've got trying to pick up some, again, like we did with the vision. We went to the schools and included some schools. We want to make sure we're touching base with the NDAs throughout the process, and we'll do some online stuff as well, some web surveys and so on. So that's going to happen kind of across the whole program. So that's the idea, the framework. We're going to talk to council about this next week, and I wanted to update the commission about it, see if you had any thoughts, suggestions, see if it seems like it's on track, see if there's other things that maybe we need to look at. Oh, and then just down at the bottom is just how each of those super actions kind of, whether the statewide planning goals relate to those. So you need the state planning goal guide to know which one's which, but I could, 5 is natural resource and, protection of natural resources, historic resources. 6 is environmental quality. 7's hazards. 13 is energy. 15 is Willamette Greenway. 12's transportation, 2's land use planning, which is really a process goal, 8's parks and rec, 10's housing, 11 is facilities, 14's urban growth management, and then again, 2's land use, 9 is economy, 11's public facilities, 1 is public involvement, and 2 is land use. I've been doing this a long time.
Very good. Well, I was just going to say, Amy's the only one that was spitting him out of her mouth because she's probably the most recent to graduate from college.
I don't know if there's anybody else in the room that could do that.
So that's very good, Denny. I'm glad that you are a planning director and you know all those. You should have a quiz tomorrow on your planning.
I've been here a long time doing this stuff. But that's the, so they kind of match up. That was the idea. So any thoughts, anything I can pass on to the council as suggestions? I know you didn't have a chance to look at this early. This is pretty much hot off the presses.
Where do the zoning map changes fit into the process here?
Could you repeat? Zoning
map changes, I would have, it's a big part of the comprehensive plan. I would have expected that to be kind of called out.
It can be.
Okay.
If we need to do some map changes, some major map changes, everything gets more complicated, I think. But I've got that says map adjustments right there.
Okay.
And so I think we would identify map issues that come out. And again, up here, and as we look at each of these, if there are map issues that need to be addressed, they're addressed in each of these blocks, and then try to synthesize it all in that last step.
So it's a misconception on my end that changes to the maps and the zoning are expected or key outcome of this?
They can be.
Okay.
They don't have to be. I think what we want to make sure we do is make sure our policies are sound and reflect the vision, and if the maps don't, we should do something about it. I think there's some cleanup things that we might want to do with the maps. I know the Greenway is one that we have some issues with, the Greenway map. We have the CL zone, which is kind of, and the GC zone, which are kind of leftovers. They're the zones that we've had for years that, for the most part, we've replaced with our downtown zones, our downtown and central Milwaukie mixed-use zones. We might want to look at those two zones and see if we still want them, or if they should be changed to something else. I mean, I think that's just part of the process, is looking at each one of these and deciding whether or not there are some adjustments. The neighborhood node element might suggest some changes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, it has to, right? Because then you have to put commercial.
Depends
somewhere.
How far you want to go with it.
Yeah, I guess.
And again, that is one area that it could. Like, is the node a gathering place at a school, or is a node a major commercial center? That's a question that we have to entertain, and that's why I think that's part of this 14 neighborhood meetings. The first one is, how's this neighborhood? What does this neighborhood want for places to walk to or gather or nodes? And is it a full range of commercial services, or is it enhanced parks? Is it better routes to schools? What is it? So that's a really important step, I think.
Kim, you have any comments?
Looking forward to the process.
Okay.
I, for one, wanted to be in the office today at 4 o'clock when you were scrambling for 3 different highlighters of different color. I'm sure you're running around to every desk that you could possibly find.
There's a slight different color here. These are green. They didn't come out when they were scanned. You can see it on this. And then the last color that was added was here, so you could see that timeline.
So you could see that timeline?
Yeah.
This is
into the last for these arrows, so you could find adoption.
This is very ambitious.
It's very ambitious.
And with the amount of permitting that has been going on, and I know that some citizens were unexpected that their permit process was going to take as long as it has. Right, and it's just amount of volume,
yeah.
Right, and the amount of staff, and so this is very ambitious, and yeah, good luck.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
David's basically full-time on this. Mary is part-time. We just hired an intern who seems really bright, and I think we can get almost half-time out of the intern on it. I'm going to be putting time into it, and we'll have a consultant. So I'm hoping that's enough person power to get this work done. So, but if you guys have, I just sprung it on you tonight, so I appreciate that you haven't had time to think about it. And but if you have other thoughts about it, feel free to give me a call. I'm a little slow sometimes. I should have mentioned when you said are there information items? In fact, there is an information item, but it's kind of tied into the forecast for future meetings. Next week, the 17th, we have a joint session with the council, and this would be something that if we want to talk about at that meeting, we can as well. I'm going to talk to the council about it, but it's after our joint meeting, but we can bring up if there's a concern about time frame or anything, that's a good time to raise that.
Well, I like the fact that you are including the neighborhood associations into the mix about the neighborhood nodes and getting a little bit of their feedback on that. One thing that I would caution you is to make sure that everybody kind of, at the beginning, when you start to explain it, that you give the definitions.
Mm-hmm.
because, they're either for various reasons, but they probably are not familiar with any sort of planning or, technically what a neighborhood node means.
Well,
and so
I think it's going to be different for different people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, just some definitions and sending it out pre-meeting to them so that they can disperse it to people.
Okay.
It would be it would help facilitate your meeting a lot better too as well.
Good advice. Yeah. Might bring some more people out. Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of preparation for the neighborhood parts. I mean, even just thinking about setting the right expectations about what's possible, I think will be really important because, as you even said earlier, I mean, to a certain degree, it's what the neighborhood wants, but it's also to a more degree what's possible and what's potential. So I think, that kind of setting expectations around what this process could result in.
Yeah. Well, I'm also sort of hoping it's not trying to ramrod some things in that don't fit. Yeah. Okay. Well.
Excellent job drawing.
Hey, thanks. I haven't done this for a while. It's been a few years.
Won't even make fun of the spell check errors that I see on there.
And I knew it would have taken longer to hand this to somebody and ask them to try to do it electronically. I would have been making a million changes. Yeah, so. All right. We're going to let Vera go on, and hopefully Adam will show up soon.
All right, so we'll work to work session item 6.1. Now, so we are going to do something kind of unique with this process. What I think we'd like to do, since we have members that were on the NMIA board here with us this evening who may have questions or follow-up or something like this, what I would offer you is to kind of join us in the discussion. Can I have them sit up here at the pulpit?
I think it would be cleaner if we have them come up, and if you have questions of them, if they have comments, to just set a time after Vera makes her presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Well, basically, yeah.
Some of them were here for an hour, and so we had. Oh, sorry. Some of the folks were here for an hour before, and others weren't. So some of them heard more than others. So
okay. So here's the process. We're going to be a little loosey-goosey about it, I guess. So we'll have Vera give her presentation, and then we're just kind of going to have an open-ended kind of forum about this. Now, the trick is that if you are going to speak, you need to come to the microphone, you need to state your name and address, and you need to speak into the microphone, because if you don't, the guy that's behind that iron curtain over there is going to come and start waving his hands like he did at Denny. That's why he grabbed his microphone. So we'll just kind of take the process from there. And I have yellow cards, which then I will recognize those speakers that have given me the yellow cards. But if you want to speak after the presentation, I'm almost willing just to let you raise your hand, and then we'll just have you come on up.
Okay.
Thank you, Vera.
Thank you. Good evening. Vera Colles, planner, the planning department. Here to talk about our first work session, talking about the NMIA code amendments, NMIA being the North Milwaukie Industrial Area. To remember. So the background on this project, the goal is to implement the framework plan and implementation strategy for the North Milwaukie Industrial Area on July 18th during this past summer, after multiple advisory group meetings, public open houses, 3 planning commission meetings. City Council adopted a resolution that directed staff to prepare plan and code amendments to implement the NMIA framework plan and implementation strategy. And that basically, in fact, we were just talking about it earlier today, was about a year of work for that implementation strategy. The plan itself focuses on increasing employment density in the area, providing amenities to serve employees, and accommodating office and industrial flex space in the north area. And I have a map that I'll show in a second. A draft table of proposed uses was provided to the commission during one of your work sessions, and that was included in your packet as a comparison, so you could see what was sort of talked about as proposed zoning changes during that implementation plan process. Since the council adoption of the resolution, staff has been working, we've sort of fine-tuned a couple things, so it's not exactly the same as that table, but it's pretty consistent. But I'll talk about how we've tweaked a couple of things as we've gone through the code section and the code language itself. So a couple of the key changes, we're proposing to reduce the total number of zones in the NMI area from 5 to 2. And I have a map on the next slide to talk about this. Right now, the NMIA has the manufacturing zone, and it has the manufacturing, the Tacoma Station area manufacturing base zone. And then there's an overlay on top of that with 4 sub-areas. So those are sort of the 5 things that are happening there right now. We're proposing to combine the manufacturing zone and the overlay zone sub-area 4 into one new zone. That's sort of the bulk of the southern area, called the North Milwaukie Employment, or the North Milwaukie Employment Zone. And then to combine the overlay zones that you see here. So in the current zoning on the left, we have all the sub areas in the north, sub areas 1, 2, and 3. We're proposing to combine those into one zone, the Tacoma Station area mixed use zone. So there's a lot happening in the current code right now, and we think that it makes sense to streamline that and combine uses and combine those areas that are similar and create 2 zones, no overlay. We would be basically deleting the Tacoma Station area, the overlay zone, and put everything into 2 distinct base zones. We're proposing code language that's organized in a way that's more consistent with the commercial mixed-use zones and the downtown mixed-use zones. So just physically how the code is laid out in tables with the uses. The current code language is all text. There aren't any charts or tables or anything in it. It can be difficult to just read. So we're trying to be consistent with what we've been doing in the general mixed-use zone, neighborhood mixed-use zone, and then the downtown mixed-use zone, just as an organizational way that we're looking at the code. And we will be proposing amendments to the North Milwaukie Industrial Area Plan to incorporate elements from the Tacoma Station Area Plan, which is what exists right now, that were not addressed, and then proposing to basically delete or repeal the Tacoma Station Area Plan as an ancillary document in the comprehensive plan and adopt this NMIA plan as a reconciled document into the comprehensive plan. We will be coming back to you for a continued work session at the next meeting to talk about the comprehensive plan amendments, so that particular section, as well as the design standards and some of the development standards for the NMIA code changes. There's just a lot to talk about tonight, and it's a lot, so we're more going to focus on the uses tonight. So we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about this more. In the staff report, you had a copy of the proposed language itself, and we've identified some key questions for you to help us work through some of the details. There were some highlighted sections in the code that basically go with some of these key questions. It's sort of meant to identify, we're not quite sure where we are right now, so we wanted to kind of work through some of that in the work session. So under the category of uses, we're asking if daycare uses should be permitted in the North Milwaukie Employment Zone. It's a highlighted area right now, so we are proposing that it be permitted certainly in the MUTSA in that northern area. What do you think about allowing daycare uses in the NME? And if so, should we have size limit? How do you want us to talk about that? Is it a limited use? Is it just outright permitted everywhere? We'd just like to have that conversation. We're proposing to combine warehouse and wholesale uses into one category of uses in the chart right now. They're 2 separate uses, but the language actually refers to the other in some of their code language. It's a little difficult to kind of figure out actually what the difference is when we're asked to kind of make a determination, or when the planning director's asked to make a determination. Well, is this a wholesale use or is it a warehouse use? Well, it's probably both. And so it seemed to make sense to kind of combine the two and actually have them work together. So we would like to know if the commission agrees with putting those together as their own, as one combined category of uses. Where part of the code also includes a category called high impact commercial uses that included some specific uses within the table. We're proposing to basically eliminate that and pull those uses into the actual use categories that they are in the table. That included outdoor recreational uses, adult entertainment uses. We've sort of just created its own, use and sort of gotten rid of that high impact commercial section. And then we'd also like to know if you think that hotel and motel uses should be permitted in the MUTSA. So that's sort of our first kind of bunch of key questions, and to the chair, we can sort of talk about these in sections as we go, or I can go through all the key questions and then open it up. However you'd like to kind of organize the discussion I'm happy to do both or either, I guess.
Why don't we do all four all at once? And then we'll go back to each individual question, and then that way the audience will have a chance to be able to participate fully.
So I'll just go through all of the key questions, and then we'll come back around. Sure, that's fine. Yep, whatever works. Okay. We also are identifying building height as something that we'd like to talk about. The maximum height is proposed to be 65 feet. There has been some discussion at the staff level of increasing that to something like 90 feet, which would essentially be 7 stories. We have examples of, in Portland, of some higher, kind of high-rise industrial buildings. The New York building is, I think it's called, as an example. So it's something that we wanted to bring to the commission for consideration. Should we increase the height? And if we do, how should we do that? We could do that by a bonus, which we do right now in both the general mixed-use zone and the downtown mixed-use zone. We could do it by a bonus through essentially performance standards, or it could be a height variance and actually specify a height variance to go to a certain height. There are different criteria that we could consider depending on which route you might think that we could go. Through a height bonus in the existing code right now, we allow for green building to allow for an extra story. In the MUTSA, we could consider, residential. If there was a story of residential, you could get that residential bonus. Those are based on bonuses that we have right now in the downtown, as you know. Through the variance, we have criteria in the existing code right now for height variances that require that the applicant show that the proposal provides a public benefit or an amenity, and they would get the additional height, or through exceptional design. And that's just what it's called, exceptional design. So it's discretionary. It's intended to be. So depending on if you think that the height is something that we should consider going up, how should we do that? Back to sort of that idea of the wholesale warehouse distribution use, there was staff was wondering if we think that we should be limiting that in the MUTSA, in that northern area, which is kind of more the mixed use area. Is that something that we should we, and how? Should we limit the size? Should we put any kind of limitations on that use as an allowed use, or should it just be permitted and let the market decide how much of that would be built in that area up near the train station? Waste management as a category of uses. Currently, it's permitted. We are proposing, or the code amendments propose, that it not be permitted in the MUTSA, and that it be permitted as a conditional use in the industrial area, in the NME zone. Right now, we have one business there now. The proposed language has some language that basically grandfathers that business in as a permitted use. So any new uses, and there's a date, I think it says December 31st, 2017 or something like that. But any new waste management businesses would be permitted through a conditional use process. So we're asking if you agree with that way that we've sort of changed the way we look at those particular sets of uses in the NMIA area itself. We were talking about, right now the code allows for trade schools and sort of what you imagine trade schools sort of traditionally, machine schools, truck driving schools, those kinds of things. But that's changing. It's evolving what we mean by that. So we're wondering about, and we also have through community service use, permitting schools like satellite campuses as well. Is there a way that we should be thinking about trade schools in a different way, expanding that definition to include something that's more like a employment training, classroom space for programming, software classes? What about classes that teach you Microsoft Office? I don't know, those kinds of things. Should we be expanding the definition of trade schools to capture those because they're permitted, and have the community service use really be focused more on like a campus, a community college campus expansion or something like that? Is that something that we want to create a distinguish between those two in the code? So we wanted to have some questions about that, or some discussion about how we might be able to do that, because we see the benefit of having those educational job training kinds of uses as something that's permitted within an employment zone. And we'll be talking about more specifically, certainly about design standards at the next work session, but something that we wanted to talk about is should there, and it's tied into what the specific design standards would be, are there specific streets that we should be highlighting for specific design standards? Or are there streets that should have design standards and the other ones don't? It's an industrial area. Are there some key streets that we should be highlighting that have some specific, windows or setbacks or landscaping or any of those things? Are there things that we want to highlight on specific streets and not on others? And what should those streets be? In some of our other zones, we specifically in central Milwaukee, we have different standards for buildings that front on Harrison versus a different street, because that's a very it's a key street. We were thinking, is Main Street different? Should it be treated differently for new construction or big redevelopment projects? Is McBride a street that we want to highlight? Or Ochico, which is called out in the Tacoma Station area plan. They're kind of gateway streets. So it's something to think about. If we think that there are certain streets that ought to be elevated, then when we have the discussion about the design standards, we can focus that language. What are the design standards and where would they apply? So those are some things that we wanted to ask about. Did include a map so we would be able to sort of pinpoint and talk about what were the areas that we're looking at. And then finally, just the next steps. As I said, we anticipate coming back in a couple of weeks to talk about the design and development standards as well as the comprehensive plan amendments. At this point, and these are tentative, but the goal was to have our first public hearing at the end of November, anticipating having a second hearing mid-December, go to the council after those hearings are completed with the Planning Commission. And again, there can be more, but this is sort of what we were sort of mapping out. Have a work session with the council at the conclusion of the Planning Commission review, and then have hearings with the council in the new year, and in that sort of early February timeframe have adoption of the code and the comp plan language, the map amendments, and those sorts of things. So that's sort of where we think we are. So that's sort of the conclusion of the presentation. Just sort of wanted to highlight the questions and kind of how we got to where we are, but happy to open it up to the discussion, how you'd like to frame that.
Do you mind staying? So then that way when...
I don't know why I even moved my chair back. I'll stay right here.
If you're uncomfortable. So what I guess at this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'll call up the people that have given a yellow card, and I'll have you just sit right next to Vera. Vera, is that microphone on?
Sorry?
Is that microphone on?
Yes,
that's next to you?
Yep.
And please state your name and address for the record, and feel free to kind of ask questions, and that's why we have Vera up there, so that she needs to flip the page, or she will be our expert to answer some questions or whatever. So I will start off with Denise Emmerling Baker, please, and Jackie Chan. I don't know if he's going to stay there or not.
I'm flipping to the map. Thanks.
this map or the other map? This one? Okay.
Perfect. So I'm going to first, Denise Emmerling-Baker.
I'm sorry, yeah, and you have to, and here's the thing.
I have to.
I know if you even want to go point at the map, Denny's got a,
That thing has a laser pointer.
There you go.
Yellow button.
Okay.
Yellow button.
Thank you. Denise Emmerling-Baker.
and we don't have the loose mic hanging around here, do we?
I'm not sure where it is.
Okay, we'll just let the laser pointer do it. Okay.
And I'm a member of the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and I was on the NMIA committee as well. And I am speaking today on, in particular, into this portion of that's part of this plan, which I would call the floodplain part of the NMIA. I am a resident, and I go through this, down in here, I go through that area quite a bit, driving, walking, biking. It is I'm loving the things that I've seen. I've seen a lot of input, and yet I am a strong proponent of making this part of the mixed use, and I'm going to tell you why. Because it's a floodplain, and because businesses like Mill End have been flooded recently, and because if we believe in global climate change, it's going to continue to happen. And it is my understanding, being so near the Willamette, that we cannot try to stop that flood from happening other than spending thousands of dollars building a cistern or something that won't happen. So here we are with this great new plan. It's going into the future, and we're asking businesses to invest thousands of dollars into something that might flood. And it is my understanding, and he will share more when he gets up here, that the best way, and we see it in hurricane zones, the best way to avoid damage to your business with this flooding and still have some viable business is to have parking structure below the business, which of course would hopefully fit into our height guidelines. But, and I am also understanding, because I'm learning about how much parking structures cost, that the value for parking structure doesn't seem to pencil out in the Portland metro area unless you also include some residential. So without including this in part of the mixed-use plan, we are essentially saying to the businesses, please invest thousands of dollars, and you might flood. And we, because we can't offer parking to you. You can't build it on stilts or parking and make this viable. So that's number one. Number two, as you can see, part of the original input from the community, I heard, let's utilize Johnson Creek, let's make it more beautiful. This is the one area in Milwaukie that Johnson Creek could be made more beautiful. And therefore, making it more mixed use would give some reason to make Johnson Creek more beautiful. And I know that he will speak more when he comes up. I believe that we have a business owner, a landowner, who's done a lot of the research, who says, yes, if I could build mixed use here, I would. So this isn't a pie-in-the-sky idea. So all of the above, if you'll notice, all of this is residential. This is residential right here, right across Ochoco. So even, yes, if we had to say, is this Waverly and Millport? If we had to say just here was mixed use, fine. But I think, in all fairness to these businesses, and I do fear for the future of our climate, that we will have more flooding, offering that as a mixed use option with looking at, these people know how to look at design codes to say, okay, how much residential, it needs to be parking, commercial, and residential, and we need to have some codes in so that the residences aren't complaining and there aren't fumes. But it's not like it's imaginary. It has happened. It is happening in Portland. And it's the builders, the landowners know how to make it viable, and I think it still will increase the employment because we're allowing them to go up stories. It will connect Selwood to Portland. We have the bike path here. They just walk across these streets. To me, it's prime for residential. It's not, we're this side of McLaughlin, whereas this part, even though we do have residential right at North Main, it's not as prime. I see the mixed use there, but this part doesn't seem as prime because you're divided by these areas. But this, I don't see how residential would be negatively affecting our plans to increase employment or the look of the area. Right now, many of the businesses there would support residential use. Young's Marketing, Milland, AMR, none of those are toxic or nauseous, noxious to residences. There are many businesses that already exist that would coexist with residences. That's my thinking.
Any questions? So, Vera, I want a point of clarification on this. Ms. Emily Baker, the Planning Commission would absolutely agree with your assessment, and as we move forward with the plan, we did take that, and so I'm terrible at direction, so I will take the lower left corner that you had pointed out between Millport to 224. We had proposed, or we had decided that should be mixed use as well. Now, I believe that council has reversed that decision. So at this stage of the process, the plan has been adopted, or so are we allowed to look at that, or are we only allowed to look at code measurements?
Well, part of this process is the comp plan amendment, which is this document and its reconciliation with the Tacoma Station Area Plan. The council did not agree with the commission as far as allowing residential uses in that NME area or in that area that you're identifying, and so their recommendation and the adoption in the plan document itself, the language, maintains that as an employment zone and does not permit residential uses. I'll look to the planning director to see what does that mean if the planning commission wished to. I'm going to sort of imagine that the idea is, what if you wanted to kind of go back to that recommendation? Is that right?
I think the council basically directed staff to come forward with a plan that implements the version that they, I can't say they adopted it, but what they did was they gave us direction to implement it. That was the action they took. And the commission can disagree with that. There's no reason the commission has to follow that direction. We as staff need to make sure there's an option when it gets to the council, I think, that follows that direction. So, I would expect you guys might not agree with that in your last action.
So I guess my question is that when we looked at the timeline, and so we were going to bring stuff back, and then you have some public involvement later on in those steps. If you find that the public involvement says, hey, we should make the left half side off of McLaughlin an MU TSA, right? That acronym changed too, right? Yep. Was it always in it? Yeah. In MU TSA, does that mean that it's still open for debate for council? I know who signed your paycheck, and I know that we don't get a paycheck, so I realize the position that you're in. But
I think we will represent what a commission recommendation is to the council. So it ultimately is the council decision. If you guys disagree with them, that is your prerogative. You get to do that. You're the planning commission. You have so I don't see any problem with you taking that position. Yeah. All I'm saying is, when we bring our staff report back to the council, we'll give them a version that has it and maybe a version that doesn't have it.
Okay.
Excuse me. So I guess I'm also thinking about this, and the neighborhood nodes thread that goes through these work blocks, and so where does that fit in? I mean, if the neighborhood, again, the public outreach and involvement is saying we want to reconsider the uses because we want a neighborhood node that has these qualities. Or so what's the timing, I guess, in terms of this body of work with the adoption of this body of work?
Well, I think by the time we are deep into the neighborhood node discussion, this should be pretty close to being wrapped up. But the neighborhoods that I identified there were all of the residential neighborhoods. We have 7 residential neighborhoods, and I put down 14 meetings, one being
Right.
at the beginning and one being as we move into the middle of the process. Didn't really anticipate, I mean, if we had a neighborhood meeting in the, but I think that's a really good question. I mean, when the concept of neighborhood node was developed, was it really just about residential neighborhoods? Was it also the industrial neighborhoods? I don't know. Maybe that's back on the table when we're having that discussion. I would hope that it's wrapped up as part of this process for this area.
Could it be that I appreciate that a lot of input has come to this point, and probably enough to support the current zoning changes that you're recommending, but that the commission could bring up some of the points again? You know, have we carefully looked into the floodplain viability that we're expecting employers to go in there and they might flood, and thereby rendering their land unusable or their business? Have we really looked into the feasibility that this is the best place to accentuate Johnson Creek? Obviously, you see in there, they've made a nature space to accommodate the floodplain, whereupon we are asking businesses to absorb that floodplain without offering them a viable form of protecting themselves with structured parking affordably by allowing mixed use. And not just for that, I do believe if you have an apartment here right across from the most expensive homes in Portland, you don't feel badly for living there. You know what I mean? If you choose that, this is a beautiful area to live by and to walk by. And if this were made more beautiful, it would be fine too. Right. So I don't want to take too much of your time.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. And I guess also, you know, along those same lines, and in terms of the comp plan update, when looking at natural resources and environmental quality, you know, I think that this is a conversation that should also be part of that work. So I guess that's, I don't know what the answer is. I guess it's, again, a timing issue for me in terms of adopting something, but then knowing that we're going to be drilling into these particular areas that impact some of these.
Well, I think what we're drilling into when we look at the comp plan is the policy direction and ultimately some of the code to implement those policies. And so as we look, and the basic policy framework in the code is not horrible. There's some good policies in there that drive our code and some of the decisions. It's not organized well. It misses some things that was done a long time ago. So I think it's a matter of updating that. I don't know that it's going to. I don't know that anything we're going to do as we do that comp plan is going to radically change the overall substance. So we have a set of policies today that talk about protection of the floodplain, talk about protection of the natural area there. What we're talking about here is how do you integrate development with that in a better way. And you know, the chance to look at this is now. It's not out of the comp plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Peter Stark.
Right. Peter Stark, 2939 Northwest Cornell Road in Portland. I was also on the NMIA committee, which is always a mouthful to say. And to start on the positive, I think that the process was very well run. I think that the outcome is positive. I think that there's a lot of kernels of things that hopefully will produce some real development. I'm really here specifically for the mill-in store and the property around it. And the map I passed around, you've already seen. And I thank this commission again for supporting the Dietrichs and their concern that they're going to lose their store. And it's a reality because they've already been flooded twice. And they've already said that they're willing to commit to the city, that they will build a mixed-use development, which is the only type of development that will allow them to put structured parking underneath the building. And, you know, I want to point, actually, can we go to that, the zoning map that shows the proposed?
Yep.
I want to point out that, in fact, the current zoning that's being proposed would be appropriately applied to the, where's your little the yellow thing here, to this area down here that's within the zone plane. If it were MTSA, it would have all of the tools that would allow the Dietrichs to proceed with their development. And again, they're willing to make a commitment to the city, whether it's through, you know, a 10-year obligation or something to say that it would be developed, you know, based on some mixed use. And I also want to point out that it's already been mentioned that surrounding this is a lot of residential, just as there is around this area. There was concern by the city council about proximity to industrial uses, but that already exists in this plan. So there are ways to address that through protection and covenants and other tools I've talked to Denny about. It really came down to this, and this is what I told City Council as well. We either have an opportunity to do something with these properties or we have an opportunity to do nothing. And because of the current floodplain, the building eventually will have to be condemned. It's already been flooded twice. We've had 4 feet of water in the building. The Dietrichs would like to put structured parking in, put a building on top, and put housing on top of that to make the parking affordable. And they already have on this site or in this area, they've got American Medical Response. They've got, I think, an autistic school. Is that correct? You know, it's a
service for us.
Well, they've got a, you know, for kids. They have a nonprofit for kids. They've got the Johnson Creek watershed in that area. They've got a lot of mixed uses already that exist that actually may not even be allowed through the proposed zoning. But regardless, you've got a property owner right now that is willing to commit to do something that would really help develop the area and keep employment. They want to keep the mill-in store. It's a historic store for them. They've been around for 100 years. And again, you know, the fact that Planning Commission supported kind of moving ahead with that was much appreciated. We were a bit surprised that when in front of City Council that, you know, their concerns were that it would compete with the downtown, that they already have a lot of housing, and yet this plan already has housing in it. So I guess what we're really talking about is just taking the current zoning that's being proposed and add it to the area where there's a floodplain. And actually the suggestion of taking along Johnson Creek was something that I suggested during the committee meetings. I keep thinking of what they've been able to do down in Ashland where they take the creek area and they put some components that are attractive. I've done a lot of work in the Central East Side. I think some of you know that. And having a commercial corridor go through the center of industrial lands can be a benefit. It provides some relief for the employees. You could have your daycare center in that space. You could have a little restaurant or a coffee shop. It's okay to have those amenities. And along those lines, a daycare center is critical. I'll tell you, we're going through that pain right now on the Central East Side. There are a lot of parents that both work. You need to provide enough services so that people have a place to take their kids.
Any questions for Mr. Stark? Are you thinking one in your head?
Well, I was just trying to think if there's an analogous business in Central East Side.
Absolutely. We have, the Central East Side's a bit of an anomaly. There are actually 12 or 13 separate zones within the district, from IG1, IG2, IH, all the way to RH, and you know, residential, and employment, EXT, which is the whatever you want to do zone. And I like to describe the district as sort of a tapestry where you have these different fabrics of of zones that run through it. And so MLK Grand, Burnside Cooch, Sandy, Belmont, Morrison, those are EX zones that are right through the middle of the heartland of the industrial area. You've got housing, you've got mixed use, you have grocery stores, you've got, and we've started to kind of mix, which is happening in this plan as well, a little bit of retail sprinkled into the industrial areas and the manufacturing areas. And we think that will help to promote growth. But it's okay to have these swashes of almost pure retail, which is why they're, I think, allowing 5,000 square foot of retail to come into the area. But the problem with the southern end of the property is frankly, it's one of a physical nature. They really can't do anything with the site unless there's an allowance that gives them the ability to develop. And that was our plea with City Council. And it's more of a pragmatic, practical need. Although I would argue that it really doesn't negatively impact the industrial zone at all. It's separated by Millport. It's approximate to residential. Elevation is dropped. It can be a separated development, if you will, that won't negatively impact either the industrial or vice versa.
Thanks. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so why don't we flip back to the slide and let's ask, and is there anybody else in the audience? Amy, yes?
I don't know what point.
You got to talk into a microphone, please.
I'm Amy Koski. I've been the project manager on the NMIA planning process, so I just thought it might be helpful just to share what I recall hearing at the City Council discussion, because probably not everyone listened into that, about their decision around that, just to bring it up to the same conversation. So the sense was that we were, in a sense, adding more flexibility to that NME area by allowing commercial uses. It's the 5,000 per individual space, so up to 20,000, I think, as a whole within a building or a development. But currently, we don't allow commercial. The Mill End store happens to be a non-conforming use, and so that still wouldn't be allowed today to be built with what we're proposing in the new code. But I think council was looking at it that within the NME, we are adding some additional flexibility by allowing some commercial. So that was one. And so there would still be some more opportunity that that zone would not have currently had. That putting residential in the floodplain, residents in the floodplain, how do we weigh putting employees versus residents, and kind of what does that look like? That was another question that came up. When it is just that we have a floodplain issue. Maybe that's the bigger question. And then that we didn't want to take away from all of the efforts that we're working on in the downtown with this residential mixed use, that we have several developments or potential for several city-owned lots to become mixed-use residential developments. And so this could be a pull from that if we continue to do the residential up by Tacoma Station area, that might not be as much of a conflict, but having it right next to downtown could be an issue. And then that in general, we have 75% roughly of our citywide land zoned residential. And if you break it down, I think by the time we get to industrial, it's around 12%. So it was an employment preservation perspective, preserving this land to continue employment uses. I think those are the main key points, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you.
Happy to go back to sort of the questions, but given the conversation that we've had, it would be helpful for staff to perhaps get some direction from the commission on what you'd like the code amendments to look like relative to that area, and if the idea is to apply either the MUTSA or whatever, to that area to allow for the mixed use and the residential uses. It would be helpful to know that.
Can we save that one for last?
Right? I just wanted to put that out there. It would be great. If you'd like us to do something differently, we'd like to know what that is. Okay.
Yes, sir. No, you have to come up to the microphone and state your name, please.
I'm Dan Canfield, live at 2107 Southeast Moores Street. Hearing this discussion about the zoning, if you could go back to the one that shows the two, I had thought that was entirely off the table, that this question had been decided as to whether or not this zoning that is up here could be included here or here. So I just wanted to comment that to me personally, it has always seemed quite logical to include this whole section in this zoning. That's just my 2 cents worth.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you. Okay, so let's just start from the beginning, and I'll just kind of shout them out, and then you guys just kind of come on in. Daycare.
Can I clarify? So what we discussed tonight will be the recommendation to City Council, or no? Okay.
No, you're providing direction to staff
okay.
for what the code amendment language will look like for the public hearing.
And then you'll hold a hearing on it. And
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're still,
Thank you.
We're still a public hearing, at least one away from council.
Okay.
So yeah.
We got long way to go.
Got it.
There are other options here. I mean, we're looking for suggestions so that we can craft a good, solid ordinance for you that may not need a lot of adjustments later.
Okay.
Right.
But it may need adjustments during the hearing process. If there are things that you hear about that you need more information about, this is a time to ask for it.
Thank you.
Daycare.
Where there's employees, there's kids, and the kids need somewhere to go during the day. I don't see why we'd object. If we want an employment center, you need an opportunity for daycare.
I would agree.
Mm-hmm. So my only comment is that I would not like to see a standalone daycare. Mm-hmm. I would like it to be at least incorporated within either a business or in a business building. So in other words, you just can't put a KinderCare out out there, but something that's incorporated in with the business.
Sure.
Just for safety and security, and if you're having trucks and stuff, it'd just be better off inside a building.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask if there's transportation system plan issues with that allowed use.
The way that we've done the transportation, sort of the impact kind of general look at our reasonable worst case scenario was based more with office and industrial uses. So I think this is the kind of thing that would be absorbed as a use within our reasonable worst case scenario. So that's not going to tip us over kind of where we are with that, I don't think.
Say anything during the process on that topic?
Yeah, I think it's fine, but I need you to come up to the mic, please.
I just wanted to offer, your suggestion's a smart one, because if you put daycare within a business, from a transportation point of view, you have the same commuter dropping off their own kids.
Right.
So it helps your transportation.
Trip time.
Right.
Or your trip period.
Well, there's not another trip generated from that.
Right.
Yeah.
You're doing the generating right there.
Yeah.
Right. The idea would be is that the daycare is a convenience to the workers there, or close enough of the residential. It's not supposed to be a destination place of a daycare. Right.
Makes sense.
Okay. All right. Warehouse wholesale.
I feel like I need more information on this.
Okay. I'm neutral on it, so more information sounds great to me.
Okay.
What I would suggest doing is looking at the current MTSA zone, the current zoning, and reading the two descriptions, because there are two different categories. One of them is warehousing and one of them is wholesale. And we look at them and we go, how are these different? That's how we ended up with this. I mean, I know they can have similar characteristics. I think of warehousing as a business that is like some of the businesses that we have out there today, the cold storage businesses. They have a warehouse, they have a shipping distribution network. There are similar uses that do have some wholesale components. And when you look at the two descriptions, I think it's warehouse includes wholesale.
Yeah.
What the heck does that mean? So we just thought, wholesale, I can think of some businesses that are wholesale business, like a kitchen supply store. That is different. That's more like a retail to other businesses. But they're different, but they do have some similar characteristics at times.
Yeah, and
the scale.
I agree with the catch-22, right? The difference between wholesale and warehouse is that wholesale allows for individual customer pickup, right? And a warehouse is typically shipping and receiving only. But what happens is that a wholesaler is warehousing goods for basically either local delivery. Basically all they're doing is breaking things down into smaller boxes to be able to, for purchasing power of.
So our question was sort of, does it make a difference? Do they need to be separated, or could we combine them into one district?
See, and so then, but what do you call Costco? What is Costco?
Costco's retail.
That's retail.
Yeah, but you have to be a member to get in, and it sells wholesale market.
I think we have size.
You understand what I mean? I'm just trying to.
I don't think it would meet.
You can't have a Costco footprint.
It's more retail than wholesale.
Okay, all right.
Well, and I think in the way that we define, the way wholesale is described and defined in our code, it's meant that it's distributing merchandise exclusively to businesses, not the general public. Costco allows the general public can shop there. You have to be a member, but the way that we define wholesales, it's going to businesses. It's not going to the general public.
Right.
So, but I think the way Denny described it, I think, again, do we care? Is there such a difference between these two things that one would be allowed and one wouldn't, or I don't know. They're both permitted anyway. So in trying to figure out what the biggest differences are, it's still trucks, it's still the building.
And I think more information. I think one thing is maybe trip generator, right? Is there really a trip generator difference between a wholesaler and on air? I don't know if that data is available, but
it is.
But I mean, is there really? I mean, because most of your wholesalers are shipping anyways. So I mean, really, how many customer pickups do you have?
Right. We'll do a little more and come back with you.
And also, if there are any indications about the market need for one or the other, that might be helpful to understand.
Okay.
Well, just as an aside, there is, in terms of like Amazon distribution centers and similar types of uses.
Okay.
They've got one in Pearl, they've got a couple others in the region, I think. So there's more and more of that type of localized distribution.
Okay.
No, I need my glasses. I'm getting tired, I can tell. Okay, high impact commercial category. And could you get us to the page that's at?
Sure.
I totally missed this.
Yep. So the high impact commercial uses, you need to go to the strikeout section of the existing code because we've eliminated it from the current code or from the proposed code. So in your packet, it would be page 23, 6.1, page 23. And this is a section of standards for conditional uses. And so 312.5B, sort of near the bottom half of the page, high impact commercial uses was a category of conditional uses. And so there were certain So we do talk about adult entertainment businesses are in there, and it's a conditional use category of things, but it seemed to us that we could absorb those within the regular table of uses. But in the table, on the page before, page 22, it's section K. It's category K of things. So it's a category that generates substantial traffic, noise, light, irregular hours, such as drinking establishments, commercial recreation. So that could be a ball field, mini golf, something like that. Adult entertainment, hotels, motels. So it was a separate category of conditional uses. And we thought that we could absorb that within the table and deal with it differently and not kind of clutter up the code language with a separate category like that. So that's what we did.
Right, so just to cross it off.
Yeah. This one, it sort of gives the planning director more discretion than wanted in determining what a high impact commercial use is.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't even give a definition in this.
That's right.
Too much discretion to Denny.
We just had a list of examples of what that kind of use might be, and that was it in the table. Yeah. So what we did was we pulled drinking establishments into the code, said that they were limited use in the NME and limited or conditional use in the MUTSA. So we pulled the individual types within the table and dealt with them that way, as opposed to creating this weird category of high-impact commercial uses and doing it that way. So,
right, so that somebody could call it, oh, well, that's a high impact, and so now you got to go get a conditional use, which, what's definition? I mean, it sounds like to me that heavy industrial is more of a high impact than a drinking establishment, but that's all right. So yeah, I'm okay. Right?
Reasonable.
Yes.
Okay.
Agree.
Okay.
All right.
Hotel, motel.
Yeah.
What are some examples that you can give us of a similar, in Portland, where you have...
I might know of one.
You might, okay.
The Silver Cloud Inn in Northwest.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know where that is?
I do, yeah, okay. Okay.
I don't.
It's Vaughan, is that right?
All right.
20 in the 20s.
You exit off 405.
It's not far from Montgomery Park.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Can I speak, and if you could put either the double map or the other map up again. Might I point out that if this were multi-use in here, what a prime spot for a hotel. Are you aware there is not a boutique hotel or a hotel I would send my family to until you get to Oregon City on the river? There's not one in Selwood. There's not one near Reed College. There's not one near Providence, Milwaukie. If we could get a hotel in here, it would be full for people visiting Waverly, for people visiting Milwaukie, Providence, for my sister in a wheelchair. So, yes, there's Airbnb, but people want hotels. And what we know that McLaughlin is basically a divided highway, going north and south. It's quite easy to go both directions from here. It is not on this side to go back south again. You have to cross over. I find that this would be ideal if there were a hotel located in here, particularly if taking advantage of the nature of Johnson Creek, if they landscaped it well, and or looking over at the beautiful property of the cemetery, of Waverly, of Garthwick. So just considering, should this zoning change again? I don't think any of our downtown development areas will be turned into hotels. It's going to be multiple stories of mixed use, because that's what developers are saying brings the money in. And again, we're not allowing the multiple stories of mixed use in here. But I do think there's enough land here that somebody might see the value of putting a hotel in.
Right now, the proposed code has it as a conditional use in the NME, and our question is about the MUTSA, if you think that it ought to be a conditional use there as well, or permitted, I suppose, as well. But yeah.
What is the typical square footage of a... I mean, is that an easy question to answer? I mean, I could think of the Monarch, which is a sprawling building, and then I could think of... I mean, the River Shore, I guess, is a little bit more square.
Parking is often the problem.
Yeah.
You know, so parking takes up a lot of space for hotels and motels.
But, right, your proposal would be, oh, well, I could build a hotel right at a light rail stop.
Sure, but I'm just saying that a developer of a hotel, motel often wants vehicle parking.
Vehicle parking, and I guess, and then, so then my next question would be, how much parking does our code require a hotel, motel? So does it actually work on what is currently the MUTSA?
So I actually I missed when I was reading the chart. Sorry, I reversed it. So the code currently is proposing that it be allowed by a conditional use in the MUTSA. The question is in the NME. My apologies. I've been looking at this chart so much this week, so I was reversed. So the question is, should we allow hotel, motel uses in the remainder of the NMIA, so in the NME area? Is how we...
Right, but if we look at it logically, a hotel or a motel...
It's going to need...
well, let's just say a hotel.
Right. Sure.
In the current MUTSA would pretty much take up the whole MUTSA, right?
I don't think so. Depends how big it is.
Yeah.
Right.
But let's look at the... Imagine for a moment a redevelopment of the ODOT site with a hotel motel behind it, something that is connected with it. There's plenty of room to do something like that.
Well, I guess you're right? A 3 or 4 story building with 4 or 5 units deep, I guess, right?
Right.
It wouldn't be a large hotel, but it would be a...
Right.
Okay. Any opinions on this one?
I guess it's just a little going back to, Amy's comment about the percentage of total city land zoned for employment, and if we were making this conditional use, it can take, is that the type of employment,
Right.
So taking that out.
So are you talking about as the conditional use in the NME or in the MUTSA, or both?
Well, it's already conditional use in the MUTSA. So
as proposed,
the question is
in the NME.
Right. So that's wrong.
Yes. So
that should say.
Yeah. That should say NME.
Right. Adding it as a conditional use in the
NME in the remainder of the area.
In the remainder.
Apologies for that.
Maybe you need a little more information.
Sure. Okay.
Well, you know what? What happens is that this ends up... How big is that? How big do we recommend that MUTSA zone to be?
Right.
Right.
So you're saying if the MUTSA, if we were to try again to recommend to council to expand the MUTSA, there might be room for you to consider a hotel, but if we weren't to make that recommendation, you wouldn't?
So here is my thing. I agree with Commissioner Travis when her statement is, if this is truly an employment industrial zone, then a hotel or a motel does not produce, let's say you have 5 or 6 cleaning people, 2 or 3 managers, 5 or 6 people working the desk. Does that really produce the kind of industrial employment that you're looking for in the zone? The answer is no. Right? So if you want to take the letter of the law, then it probably shouldn't be permitted. Now, the question is does it make sense to allow one in there? And it probably does. But, right, if you stick to the purpose of what this is for, then no.
Yeah, I think that's the quandary.
Can I offer something?
Yes.
The Silver Cloud is actually a good example. That particular hotel, which is in the industrial area, north industrial area, is used primarily by business people that are coming in to visit the other businesses. So they can be supportive of adjacent areas. I think keeping it in the TSA area makes a lot of sense. I think, as Kim has pointed out, if you start to diminish the amount of employment in your primarily employment area, it's a problem. But I might make the pitch that if you were to expand the TSA to the south area, the Dietrichs do own the Thunderbird and the Red Lion Inn, and they're very prominent hotel owners, and they might be willing to come back to this commission and speak on the viability of possibly doing it there. I'm not saying that they want to, but they are experts in that area.
Okay. Did you have something that you wanted to say, sir? I saw you raise your hand and then, no? You're, okay.
If I may, we could leave the language as it is right now and see where it shakes out.
I'm very comfortable with that.
Likewise.
Mm-hmm. We can wait till the hearing, we can, okay. We can table that. Okay.
Sorry, now you got to flip back to the, I know. It's hard being the writer and the person that's in charge of the computer.
Fine. Okay.
All right, height bonuses.
Building height.
And I'll be happy to kick this one off.
Sure.
I truly believe that green buildings should be able to get an extra story.
Okay.
Okay? I am not so sure that in a already residential zone that you give a bonus height for residential. It doesn't make any sense. As we have seen from the variance, it's very hard to define what is a public benefit and what is an amenity and what is exceptional design.
We haven't tested that yet through the chair. That the height variance has not happened yet.
I understand,
yeah,
but we went through it. We went through it with our decision on the 5-story building that you weren't here for downtown.
That was a step back variance.
I understand that, but it was the same. Mm-hmm. Does it provide public benefit, amenities, and exceptional design to be able to allow that?
Right.
That right, and so we've kind of been through that,
mm-hmm.
right? And I myself would much rather go with a bonus height of green building and only allow. I really don't care if you allow 2. I mean, just the height doesn't really bother me, but I think adding residential in an MUTSA is ridiculous for a flight bonus.
The residential's optional in that zone, not mandatory, correct?
Right, but if you're going to build an office building, right, and are you saying that you're going to have 3 stories of office and then to be able to get 7 more to be able... Assuming this means 6 or meaning 5, right? 65 feet. You guys are thinking 5 stories, right?
Right.
So if you're going to have an office building, right? Are you really going to put in 1 level of residential to make another? From whatever you're going to be building that thing for, you're either going to do mixed use on the. You're either going to do retail or commercial on the bottom floor. Then you're going to do residential, or you're just going to build an office building. You're not going to mix office and, unless if you do office on the lower floor, but you're not going to do 3 offices on a level and then say, oh, I want extra height. But no, you're renting it out because you think your office space rental is going to pay off your dividend on the property, not because you think the residential is going to pay for the office space down below. You don't. Not really the way that works.
The market will dictate.
Right, and the market will dictate.
And there is examples of all.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, you've got to talk into the microphone.
I'm sorry.
I don't care that you're talking, but you got to talk into the microphone.
As an architect and planner, I talk too much. But there are quite a few examples of where they have all 3 mixed uses, but the market actually drives when that happens. And I think you're essentially correct that it's more economical on a lower story building, something like 7 stories or under, to have retail office or retail housing. But there are many other examples where they go higher with a bonus, and it encourages them to go to get the extra development to add housing at the top. And that does happen.
So like a penthouse?
Well, no. I mean, they might put, like, if there are currently 5 allowed, they might put 4 as office and then a retail on the bottom and then put 3 on top that are housing. So they would mix it up a little bit to get the bonus height.
5 stories of hotel and 2 stories of condos on top.
Yeah, condos on top.
Mix and match.
And I might add that if the built-in parking counts as a story, the parking structure underneath your building counts as a story as well, then what he mentioned, let's even say you had 2 levels of parking, then you need to have retail and possibly, there is the mixed use. I see it downtown. And again, Portland is still in the top 10, and we are a suburb of Portland. Worst traffic, apparently, for a city our size. I find more and more people are living where they work, and I know some artists downtown, or people moving to the Pearl if they're working downtown. And therefore, this idea that people might live in a building with commercial is not absurd, especially as we look to the future. We have to keep looking as to what it's going to be like 3 years from now. And people are not wanting to commute as much. So, yeah.
I'd say yeah in the green building bonus.
And you want 90 feet?
Height doesn't bother me.
How about you, Don?
The height doesn't really bother me either, and I like the green building bonus. I think if we're okay with tall buildings, I don't know. I mean, just having some certainty rather than requiring a variance makes sense to me. If tall is okay, tall is okay. Let's make it predictable.
Yep.
Agreed.
Yep.
Okay.
So do we want to give a 2-story bonus for green building? Or do we want to do 1 for green building and 1 for residential? It just seems to me that then every commercial retail down below and then residential up above is always going to be a 6-foot tall building because you're giving that bonus height. So it almost seems ridiculous to call it 65 feet. You might as well just call it 75 feet, or I'm sorry, probably 70 feet, or I'm sorry, 80 feet. And, or 77 feet, however that math all works out. And then just give a green building bonus.
Or just really incentivize green and go with the 2.
You're looking at me like I am wildly crazy.
I totally didn't understand that.
Basically, what I'm saying is that you just allow all 6 stories, and then you give 1 bonus height for green building.
Well, I think that the thought was that in this case, we came up with 65 feet before, assuming that a number of these buildings would have taller spaces. So it was actually thinking about mixed use that included some industrial. So you had, so 65 feet was not necessarily a 6-story building. So I'm not sure we do this in this zone by story as much as by height.
I agree.
Okay.
And
if the ceiling heights will be higher.
Okay. All right. So why don't we come back, right? And let's clean up that idea. And I think we're all on board with the green building. Okay. As a bonus. I don't know if you want to call it a bonus height or to get your building higher.
I think we all agree that we don't want to go down the variance pathway.
Right. There you go.
So,
got it. Right. Okay. So it sounds like the commission is comfortable with a higher height and that you would achieve that through at least bonus height through green building.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
We'll go with that for now and see where we land. Okay.
Yes, sir. You need to come on up to the mic, and since you haven't spoken yet, please state your name and address for the record.
Daniel Newberry, and I guess I should give my work address since that's in Milwaukie.
Sure.
Work at 1900 Southeast Millport. Just want to capture this. A lot of this area is on land that's fill material, and therefore an earthquake could potentially do a lot of damage. So I just think it's important, if you're going to start to allow taller and taller and taller structures that are going to be heavier, that the building codes should probably take into account the fact that you are in a very dangerous area structurally because it's fill material. I mean, if you go to the Portland map site and you look at this whole area, it all says earthquake hazard zone. So I just want to make sure that that gets put in the record.
Is there, does the city have code requiring earthquake hazard zone building instructions, or?
I'm not 100% certain, but I think it is a building code requirement when you are in certain type of earthquake hazard areas. There are different standards that kick in. We will double check that.
Yeah. And one thing, could you flip over to I know that we're talking about the MUTSA, but this is, I'm sorry, to the other, well, it doesn't really matter. That map's fine.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I also am worried about building height is along Johnson Creek and the shadowing of Johnson Creek for what they call predation issues and that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that when I know that we're just talking about the MUTSA, but we may be talking about the MUTSA on the left-hand side. Sorry, I'm directionally challenged towards the river. That we're not creating building heights that allow to overshadow or to somehow create a bad environment for the river and for the trees there. You understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm, I do. And I do actually just want to point out that this increased height applies to both zones. It's not just the MUTSA. The way the code is being proposed right now, that additional height would be in the NME as well. So
I would like to know if there is protection needed or if there needs to be a standoff away from the river to stop shadowing, or I don't know what you call it. And at least to allow enough sun and stuff for trees and the natural area to be able to be natural.
Okay. We'll look into that. That's good.
Does that all make sense to everybody?
Okay. All right. Question 3 was, it's how or really should we limit, and I know we're still sort of talking about that wholesale warehouse distribution idea, but is there an appetite for limiting that in any way in the MUTSA, either by size or anything like that, or is it sort of let the market decide what kind of distribution and warehousing?
Doesn't the code read 10,000 square feet?
It should have a highlighted thing on it because that was, I don't know. It was, I think I highlighted it because this was a question. I just sort of put it in there as a placeholder, but that's a number that's why we're asking this question. Is that a number? Is there a number? Should we even be limiting it at all?
So are you worried that the 10,000 square feet is too large, or are you worried that you would just end up with a bunch of buildings that are 10,000 square feet?
That's a made-up number. It's a placeholder of that, sort of anticipating that we think we want to limit the size of warehouse distribution facilities in the MUTSA, and that number is, I could have just put X's. I don't know what that number is. It's more about, do we think we want to limit the size, and what should that size be?
Is it about size, or is it about number?
It's about size.
Well,
is it
about trip count? Is it about
10,000 is probably too small.
Correct.
For a warehouse.
Right.
But for a wholesale use, it may be about right, or maybe it's too big. I don't know. It depends on the use, right? But a Costco is at least 60 to 80,000 square feet,
easily,
probably more
easily. But I'm thinking like a cash and the only reason cash and carry, right, is another bulk buy kind of thing, and their square footprint maybe 40 or maybe 30. It's kind of.
Yep. So
that's why I'm saying, well, 10,000. My feeling is that if you say 10,000 square feet, you've pretty much eliminated anybody from doing a wholesale or a warehousing because you don't give them enough square footage. So you by writing that in, you probably accomplish your goal if you don't want them there.
Well, I just assume not allow it then if we don't want it there. I don't want to do it through a performance standard like that. It's more of a decision. Do we want to limit it?
But is it about, why would this question come up? Is it about trip count? Is it about, because it's just bad commercial business or it doesn't work well with?
Oh, it's about the mix of uses. The entire NME is open to warehouse distribution and so on. The MUTSA is intended to be a more mixed use kind of zone or area. It's much smaller. Do we want to also allow these kinds of sort of high truck use, low employment numbers probably in an area that's really intended to be a bit more a more dynamic kind of area. So that's why we're raising the question. Is this a use that we want to see there? And if we do we want to limit it or don't we? So it's kind of a two-part question, but that's why.
Okay. Sir, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, my business is in the MUTSA, and in some ways you could say we're wholesale and warehouse, as well as retail and manufacturing. And while I don't have any immediate plans to do so, it could come to pass in the future that I would want to build additional warehouse. And so my question is, how might that impact that if that was something that I wanted to do 5 years down the road? So I would say that 10,000 square feet is way, way, way too small. We've got 6,000 square feet, which is sort of like a garage, an oversized garage.
Right.
If I might, in this particular case, you're a manufacturer and a retail business that has warehouse for your products.
That's correct.
Right. A warehouse use that's what it is. It's a warehouse of things
it takes
that
a box and then delivers out a box.
What's the predominant use? You can have a warehouse that goes with your business, but that's not considered a warehouse use. Do you see what the distinction? Yeah. So that's the distinction we're making here, that it's a business that is warehousing, and that's all they do. So if that clarifies your question. Yeah.
I'd like to add one thing. We had this discussion before the session, and one example that's been used is the New York, which is a multi-story industrial use. Within that building, they have Amazon distribution, which is a warehouse facility. Now, there's a lot of trip count, moving boxes in and out, but they're willing to pay the additional cost to be in this very expensive building. And I think the point is, again, the market will determine what's successful and what's not. If you just are storing goods in a warehouse space at a high premium, you're not going to do it. You're going to pick a spot outside of the area. But if you're somebody like Amazon, which could be an attractive company to bring into this area, you don't want to shoo them out because the zoning doesn't allow that type of use, because you're anticipating that they would be more like just a standard warehouse and distribution facility. So, my suggestion would be allow the market to dictate what works and what doesn't work. That's my suggestion.
That's fair.
Does anybody have any feelings about this? I'll make a comment. So in this mixed-use area, I can see that reducing the amount of commercial traffic is a beneficial feature to this area. Now, if we expand the MUTSA, then there's a different discussion. But for that small portion, I don't see why it should be permitted, or it shouldn't be permitted because it's producing too much trip. Or make it a conditional use. I guess you could also make it a conditional use.
Mm-hmm.
But if you expand the MUTSA to the whole left side of the picture, then that changes my feeling altogether. So
yeah.
I think that letting the market decide just feels like the right approach to me. It's a flexible area. It hopefully does see some mixed use and residential development, and I just have a hard time predicting or anticipating the uses. I'm kind of compelled about this notion of high-value warehousing, that if that wants to come to Milwaukie and this is a place for it, that is a benefit to our community. So I'm just leaning towards the flexibility of the mixed-use space, personally.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll just permit it and move on. Okay, great.
And
We're answering a lot of questions here. This is.
Are we going to eliminate the 10,000 square feet?
Yeah,
though, right?
that won't even be. It'll just be permitted outright, and we'll just do that. Okay, great. Okay. Waste management, as I said, we're proposing to make future waste management businesses a conditional use within the NME and not permit them in the MUTSA. We would grandfather the existing waste management business as a permitted use going forward.
I was swayed by the personal testimony of the existing business, but I don't think we need, I don't know why we would even have a conditional use for future waste management business. Do we have evidence that it's a high employee, does it generate more jobs per square foot than other uses? Does it generate more economic activity per square foot? I mean, it's a non-desirable feature in Milwaukie to have more waste management. I mean, it's necessary. We all gain value from it. Right. But why would we even consider allowing more of it unless there's some compelling economic or social reason to do so?
Good questions.
I like the conditional use. I think council beat this quite a bit, and I don't know if Amy can speak on what council decided, and I have a feeling they'll beat this again. So, whatever we kind of decide, it will definitely raise to the next level. I myself, it actually produces a lot of jobs because a lot of people have to drive in, come pick up their truck, and then drive back out. So at least you are creating a workforce that may come and do breakfast, or may come and do dinner, or may decide to come and live here because that's where their employment is. I really have a problem with the not in my backyard kind of attitude of, well, it's really important, everybody wants garbage trucks, but they're so ugly, so I don't want to look at them kind of attitude really kind of bothers me anyways. So I think as a conditional use, but this one's going to get pushed up to the next level anyway, so.
We'll see.
But the use could actually be a different type of use, a different type of recycling use or something.
Right, yeah. I mean, it could be a sorting station or.
Yeah, I mean, are there definition? I don't see a definition of waste management.
Right. So it could be, but it wouldn't necessarily be exactly what it is. And basically what the council said is find a way to allow the existing use to continue and to modify without going through a conditional use process. But in the rest of that district, some type of recycling waste management may be appropriate through a conditional use process. So,
and like an incinerator would be considered heavy industrial use anyways, right? I mean, you wouldn't be able to put in a garbage burning facility with a smokestack there. I mean, is that waste management or is that heavy industrial?
I don't know. I'd have to look at our definition of waste management.
There is. Yeah, I can.
Oh, where? What page?
Yep. It's at the bottom of 6.1, page 9.
And so a recycling sorter, for those of you who don't know, basically what happens is that your plastic, your recycle bin gets sent somewhere, and they actually literally sort through it, and then they put it into piles, and some of it goes to recycling, most of it gets thrown away, but or goes to a landfill. So that is it's not an automated job. It's certainly it's a human job that you have to do. It may be automated in the future, I don't know, but that's another high employment, high thing.
Yep.
Yeah, I just want to throw in something that this waste management discussion brings up, I think, a larger issue. Early on in the NMIA stakeholder group process that we went through, I was a member of that through the whole thing. One of the important functions that this whole area, geographic area, has that I think has gotten lost is that it has a real impact on regional traffic, not only Milwaukee, but regional. And in other words, if we start to focus too much on just jobs per square foot or whatever, we lose sight of the fact that if you can keep the businesses that are there now, the wholesale, the warehouse distribution, then you have those kind of businesses here close to the center of Portland. And if you force them out because you're just focusing on getting, high jobs per area and all these commercial businesses, then that whole industry moves outside, and there's going to be a lot more traffic trying to get it in and out, in and out, in and out, whereas Milwaukie is really the only, or I should say the closest in center to Portland for a lot of distribution of goods, and that has to happen somewhere. It either happens here or it happens somewhere else. So I just want to make sure that that isn't lost, that that's an important thing that was brought up in our whole process, that, it's going to cause a traffic problem if all the warehouse and distribution companies are replaced with all these commercial businesses. So just want to point that out.
Okay. So then it seems like a conditional use would be the right process.
Yeah, I think so.
I agree.
Okay, great. Okay. Almost through the questions. This notion of trade schools and employment training and job training kinds of facilities versus your more traditional school, CSU, community service use kind of use. Our trade school definition is fairly limited. I think it's sort of an older kind of version of what that means, and we see benefit in expanding that definition to allow more for those job training kinds of uses in an employment zone like this, and have it be permitted outright. So we wanted your thoughts on that, and I think we were originally kind of thinking about this question as, limiting the size for schools and satellite campuses, but it really morphed more into, let's look at our definition of trade schools, and do we agree collectively that we think that's a good idea, that we should be allowing more educational job training opportunity kinds of facilities in the area, and let those be permitted outright.
So let me frame it. So the way it was written and the way it is in the code today, trade schools are permitted use. Schools, public or private schools, are community service use. And part of this is, where's the line? What's different between those? If the community college wanted to run some classes in an existing building somewhere in the district, how would we deal with that? Would we say, go through the community service use process because you're a community college? We probably would. Is that right? Should we be permitting those in some manner? But then where's the limit? When does the community college use of 2 classrooms in a building, how many classrooms does it take before it is a branch of the community college that should have gone through a community service use? So that was kind of how this evolved. So what we were thinking was there should be sort of trade schools, training facilities, or training classrooms or something. So it's a broader definition that would allow the community college, would allow other types of facilities that are primarily focused on training for industry, training for jobs to occur here without being a full-blown college campus.
So let me make sure that I understand this. If I owned a building that was 65 feet tall in this zone, and I wanted to rent out 2 rooms to the of my building 2 rooms or maybe half of 1 story, that it would be up to the person that is renting to go and get a community service use?
That is a question that we would have to decide. I was hoping to eliminate the question if that happened, but it was like, when does a classroom situation training become a school? Schools are public. Schools are community service use.
Well, I think everybody thinks of a school as them owning their own building.
No, not necessarily.
Or renting the whole building. I guess that's the way I look at it.
We approved the church with the school in the church.
Right.
Partial use of the building just recently.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know.
I mean, maybe 100 students is the threshold at which it is a community service use as opposed to an outright use. Just throw a number out there.
I want to start a charter school. I'm going to rent part of one of these buildings in this district. How is that different? I'm going to rent one of these warehouses. I'm going to break it up into 2 parts. I'm going to use half of it for my charter school, and the other half continues to be some warehouse use. Is that a school? Mm-hmm. It's a training facility. It's a school because it's teaching kids, I guess. If I was training people for employment purposes, it would be a permitted use. So that was kind of where we were struggling with a little bit. I mean, I think we can get there, but I think we need a little bit more language around this, if it makes a difference.
I get what you're saying. I just don't know what to tell you.
Okay.
To be honest with you, I mean, yeah, you could sit there and you try to define trade school, or you could sit there and try to define school. But it seems like to me that really if somebody's just renting out half of a story, it's just office space.
It's what?
Office space.
Yeah, I mean, I
you know what I mean? I mean, it just.
Let me just say this. Part of this was the permitted use was trade school, and we thought that sounded too limiting. You know, it was like there needed to be. It would make sense to make sure that if somebody was coming in and doing those classes, the software classes that they offer for different types of training, that we would allow it because it's an office kind of use, and we would allow it. We didn't want it to get hung up.
Right.
Oh, I see.
You want to do this, and I give a number of examples. AMR is part of a building, American Medical Response, and they're in the district, and they use that to train people in emergency services. And the east side, the PCC Climb Center, which is more of the scenario you're talking about, but it is purely there for employment benefit. In other words, it's PCC, it's community college, but it's really for trade school benefits. So clearly defining trade school is the better route, rather than trying to make another distinction. I think if you describe the use as opposed to whether it's a school versus a trade school, I think you're getting in trouble, because PCC is a school, but it was focused primarily on employment, and it's right in the industrial sanctuary, and it works great. And then AMR you already have, and they're renting part of a building to have their facility there.
We'll work on a better definition if the commission agrees that this is the direction we want to go in. So we'll work on the definition and get some better language then to hone the point, I think. Yeah. Okay. And then the final question that we were asking tonight is, when we get to the discussion about design standards and specific things that how we want buildings to look, are there specific streets that we think ought to be handled differently because there's a hierarchy, because they're more of a gateway street, they're more visible, from McLaughlin or from downtown or something. Is there a hierarchy of streets in the district? And if there is, what should they
describe the current code?
Well, the current code has specific design standards for Main Street. That's essentially the one that it talks about the most for having certain things that need to happen.
Can you flip back to the map?
Yep.
Please.
This one?
There you go. That's perfect.
So right now,
Main Street is the right underneath 224 on the right-hand side of McLaughlin.
Right here.
Oh, right there.
So
Okay.
it sort of it parallels McLaughlin, and it's a continuation of Main Street from downtown. Yeah. And this is the area that has it requires certain amount for new development or major redevelopment. So there are triggers for this, but certain percentages of windows on the ground floor.
Minimum setback.
Minimum setbacks. It talks about corners and doors, and some of those design standards, not to the extent like we have for downtown, but there are some key things that the code wants buildings to sort of adhere to in these areas.
So in the current MTSA, areas 1, 2, and 3, and Main Street,
That's right.
calls for these more pedestrian-oriented street frontages. And as we looked at this, we were wondering, well, what are the streets where this is important? Is it Main Street through the MTSA? Is it Main Street through the NME all that way? Or is it Ochico? Is it, which streets are the important ones? Are there some that are important and some that are not? And we're not sure. And I think what we kind of like to do is come back maybe with a better, stronger proposal about this, saying, here's where we think they ought to be, because we don't have a recommendation yet.
Right, and what I would like, I think we have a couple of examples. We have the
Murphy site.
The Murphy site, where we, if I remember that right, we put specific guidelines towards 32nd and towards that, but we didn't really care about the inner, right? Or less design standards, right?
That's right.
And I think that we have in downtown Milwaukee, right, we have the Main Street example versus 21st and that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think that there's some precedents in the code to be able to do this. And I get that you want everything to look shiny towards McLaughlin. I think that's why Main Street is supposed to be, right? Everything that faces McLaughlin is supposed to look nice. But yeah, I mean, how far do you really, do you care about 17th Avenue? Any look towards 17th Avenue? Just for the neighbor's sake, or for that drive that you have? I drive 17th Avenue every Thursday morning. So every Thursday morning that you would say, there's something that way. So I don't know quite what the answer is, but I would use the examples that we've already set.
McBroad is like a big question mark for us.
Which one? McBroad is the windy corner on
this one.
That one right there, right? Yeah, if everything is coming off McBroad and facing in, right, it's really more about the outward appearance that you're worried about, not necessarily the inward appearance.
Well, one of the thoughts we had was in the NMIA plan, there was a sketch in there of kind of converting that street frontage and some of the warehouse buildings, some of the docking bays into, if you put a brewery in there, it'd be an area to sit.
Right.
And one of the questions, and we'll talk about this next time, was whether there needs to be an alternative. So you might have a standard that says build this street frontage, but then you might have an alternative discretionary approach that would allow you to do some more active space and provide some guidelines for what active space is.
I think that what the envisioning of this whole plan is that you create active space in a warehouse or in a industrial area. So I think that should be basically part of your design standard, is that, yeah, you have to create active space, not a discretionary active space, but you create active space.
Well, I guess
Well, the discretion are things like if you want landscape treatment or specific elements, right?
Well, I was thinking more along the lines, I mean, the standard code language for doing this is putting sidewalks and storefronts and windows and spaces like that. Well, there's got to be some other people-oriented things that one could do and not do that. That was the, so
you could have a trade-off.
So that little diagram there has no windows. They're using those industrial buildings, using the bays, opening up the bays. That, once you touch that frontage, you're supposed to comply with the code, potentially. So, wouldn't necessarily want to make that developer blow out those walls and put in windows. So we need some alternative to that. And that's kind of where we need to go with this. It's a little bit more complicated than we initially thought.
Right. I see.
Mm-hmm. But the objective, again, is to make more of an active space. So you want to have some choices there for somebody.
And then again, and where does this apply? Because it unlikely would apply to the entire area.
Right, but you would apply it to all active. What you would write, the idea of
that's
McBride,
this hierarchy
Maine,
of streets, right?
You could even say Ochoco.
And I don't know if I don't know if it's all of Maine. It might just be Maine through the mixed use area.
Why wouldn't we apply it just ubiquitously through this area?
I'm sorry?
Why wouldn't we apply, I mean, if this is a desirable treatment, why are we trying to pick and choose which streets get it?
I'm wondering, I personally am not clear about what the character of that area is supposed to be. It's an industrial office employment district. It includes warehousing. It includes, it's like such a broad mix of uses. What's the character we want along Maine? Is it that storefront type of character? Is it something else? I'm not sure.
Your problem is that I get it on McBride, the fancy dancy stuff, because it looks like it makes sense there.
It's a tighter environment. It's like more enclosed. You can sense how that could be intimate.
Right, but on Maine, you're literally going to be sitting there staring at McLaughlin.
You're yeah.
I mean, so really, how much of a pedestrian feel are you going to end up having anyways?
That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I get what you're at. Yeah, I'm not real big on Maine. I could see it on McBride.
Somebody smarter than me needs to figure that one out.
Well, we'll have Vera figure it out and bring it back to us.
So what we'll do then since we're talking about design standards at the next work session anyway, this will be part of that conversation is here's what we think should apply and where it should apply.
We'll get Amy to call up our consultants and say, what were you guys thinking?
Yeah.
I will add.
Okay.
The other piece, it does still apply more to McBride, but one of the things that came out of this process was that because the district isn't quite ready for full redevelopment, we don't know when that tipping point will happen, that there's this retrofitting process that needs to take place and that we want to allow for this reuse that it's happening. But we want to also foster that so that in the interim, if we don't see redevelopment happen, retrofitting can happen. And if we are going to see retrofitting, how do we make it active and interesting for this additional employment uses that we're trying to broaden to? So that's kind of where we're thinking and why it's come about, but at the same time, how do we fit it?
If somebody takes down a whole building, wants to build a new building, it kind of makes sense to do some of this stuff. But in the shorter term, as people are modifying buildings or using them in the short term, they're likely to get hung up by these code requirements. And that's part of the struggle we're going through.
It depends on, what kind of work they're doing to the building. If they're doing a lot of work in the exterior of the building, that's when it triggers it can trigger these things as it's written right now. So we want to be sensitive to that and not create a disincentive for.
So those are some of the things we were thinking about.
Yeah.
So we'll come back in 2 weeks with some answers, and we have some other questions.
Was that the last of the questions?
That's what the last of the official
All right.
questions, yes.
So I want to talk about this MUTSA thing.
Yes, let's talk about that.
At our last Planning Commission meeting, when we had the hearing, we decided that the lower left-hand corner should be included in the MUTSA. We have heard tonight that, maybe the whole left-hand side should be MUTSA. I will help summarize what council had said, to the exception of what we thought was that this was originally planned for an industrial use, and that we don't want to lose any more of our industrial lands. With that being said, when I still look at this, I still say that the lower left-hand corner is absolutely brilliant for housing, and I don't understand why a council that wants affordable housing and why they want more residential housing and why they like the mixed-use look, why they are concerned with competing with downtown, and when you have walkability and livability and the environment that you have there, why you would not want housing there. It baffles my mind. But I am not an elected position. I have been appointed, and so I can speak my mind that way. I still hold to my guns that lower left-hand corner should be MUTSA.
This area here, is this
Yes.
the quadrant you're talking about?
And I would not be opposed to the whole left-hand side being MUTSA either. But I don't know if what we say will carry. So, any other opinions?
Well, I thought we also had a lot of logical, considerate approach in allowing MUTSA at that section because of the Mill-End store and what they talked about. They are a community presence employer who's giving us, who I thought explained, and we deliberated strongly about why it's necessary, why you're going to need to do a structure for managing flood control in the future. So when Amy talked about how the discussion of the employment, our employment percentages and employment needs, were they citing specific data that came out of the housing needs analysis and the employment opportunities analysis? And if they were they also citing that the data spoke to certain locations of the demand for?
So the numbers
for the
were
housing?
From housing needs analysis, and I don't have, so the 75%, that was part of that. The numbers that I don't have off the top of my head, but is what our need is somewhere like 1,200 units. Am I close to that?
So.
Yeah. So, okay.
It's come up in previous.
So that was also a part of the conversation, that there's around 1,200 units of need in that land use assessment, and that we already have a number of those coming online. Well, at the time, and Denny, you guys might know this number better, but that we were on our way to starting to meet some of that. So we don't have this overwhelming need for a bunch of new units.
Explain. So 1,200 units of apartment or
Dwelling unit.
or residential?
Dwelling
We're
unit.
just talking straight up dwelling unit.
So single-family housing, a single apartment, townhome, whatever it is. A box.
And can we say how many we
Down by
kind of
the road.
have online? There were some in the, like, pending, being proposed, but at the time in July, we were saying we had some units being proposed.
There were 1,200 in the pipeline, essentially, but
92 of them may get scratched out.
Yeah, I know there's, everything's in a process right now.
Right.
But
1,200 though.
that factored into.
It was 200, it was,
Maybe 200.
wasn't that many. Anyway,
That seems like a lot of units, 1,200 units for a
That was more
landlocked city to say that that's
spoke.
online. I mean, that seems fictitious to me that you are making the statement that, oh, those 1,200 units are coming.
No, nobody said that they were all coming,
Yeah.
but that we were on our way, like 300 or 400 units.
This isn't a
wasn't that many.
20-year
It was-
planning period.
It was,
So 20
Yeah, it's a
So in 20 years,
It's projection demand.
1,200 units. So, yeah.
But so you were saying that, right. So why, in a closed loop system, which we have, and assuming that we are not going to take the current residential zoning and shrink it, assuming that that is not a desirable feature, right? That you have to have lockstep of density. And this seems like to me that lower left-hand corner seems to be a perfect place for a lockstep of density. It just seems logical. But I guess if the answer is, oh, well, everything looks rosy, so we don't need housing, then that's the answer. But I don't believe it.
And what I'm trying to get at is what kind of certitude is there in this deliberations about the downtown, the new developments and demand that's coming to downtown to meet housing needs versus, say, the employment opportunity analysis, which I'm not sure how that had much play with the housing needs analysis. I was involved in the employment opportunities analysis, and one thing that talked about was, we're trying to gauge stakeholder input from local industrial employers, and they were talking about the fact that they wish that there were more training and more integration with residents to gain more employment workforce. It just seems like our talks about allowance for expanding the definition of trade school and allowing use in the lower corner to be MUTSA squares to me with what I heard that came out of the employment opportunities analysis and doesn't. I don't know. I'm just not. I would have to be thinking the city council has some sort of very strong conviction that allowing a mixed use here is some sort of detrimental effect on the development that's coming into downtown. That it's a perceived economically it won't pencil out very well. Is that where they're coming from?
there was some concern about where we focus our residential development.
Right.
I think most of that discussion was about trying to preserve land for employment uses.
Okay.
It's
more driven about that.
If you recall, there was the Echo Northwest study that said that the demand right now is for housing. And what they basically said is if you allowed housing everywhere out here, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get housing rather than employment. So the thrust was to try to be a little bit more conservative about where the housing was going to go and try to focus it. The overall housing demand is partially based on what land is available.
Sure.
We have a lot of land that is small infill parcels, shows up in our buildable lands inventory. Metro's model assigns it to those. We've also made recommendations as part of that process about what mixed use, made assumptions about what kind of mixed use might happen. We've got sites that can accommodate mixed use. That's how you get at that, that forecast. It's not a perfect number.
Because it's also based on historical growth patterns.
It is.
Right.
So that's...
So in that sense, it could be a little low. Mm-hmm. Yep. And the economic forecast is partly a, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like what you want to see happen. Right. There's a lot of that in the EOA. It's like, how do we create the environment to attract the type of employment uses that we want? So those things all come into play.
So there is I'm thinking the wrong way about what the nexus, or I was talking maybe in the wrong way about what the nexus might be between their reasoning of what came out of the economic opportunities analysis and housing needs. However, I don't know. I'm still not convinced that's compelling enough to negate an opportunity with the MUTSA expansion to that.
Again, as I said, you guys can recommend that. I'm not certain that the council will change their opinion either.
Sure.
So
I have a comment or two.
We can bring that forward from the commission. That's fine. Whether there's others that convince the council otherwise, that's up to them.
I had been, like the gentleman said, I assumed this was a closed issue and that there's a hierarchy in the decision making, and we made our recommendation and it was overruled. There's a process and it needs to move forward. And I'm kind of okay with that we got overruled and the decision was made. But if there's an opportunity for us to make a recommendation, and we're being asked to make a recommendation, I just agree that it's logical to me that this is a great place for mixed use, and I'm really compelled about the access to Johnson Creek. Amy's statement that redevelopment is not right around the corner here if we keep it as a primarily industrial area. Residential could be a catalyst to redevelopment, and redevelopment is an opportunity to provide access to the creek to get some restoration projects done as a condition of the redevelopment. And so I'm curious, Daniel, you were the Watershed Council, if the Watershed Council has an opinion or a perspective through the NMAI process on how the zoning would changes potential zoning scenarios benefit or detract from Johnson Creek, and if you'd be willing to comment on that.
I have something, a comment related to that.
Can you do it at the mic?
Have a comment related to that. Probably not the one you're thinking you're going to get now, but as I look through the table here in the document, there are all sorts of things about setbacks for this and that, but there's nothing in there about setbacks from Johnson Creek, and that's something we talked about a lot in the NMIA process. I would really like to recommend that you put in setbacks from Johnson Creek in that document. Mm-hmm. And I do think that'll play into it, because if Johnson Creek is something that is a priority for the city of Milwaukee, to have that whole section become more beautified, become more natural, and contribute to Milwaukee in a number of ways, you got to start off with having setbacks. I mean, the building that we occupy right now is 10 feet or less from Johnson Creek, and when you allow building that close to Johnson Creek, you're going to get more flooding, and mainly because flooding is defined by who gets impact, really, right? I could foresee some potential possibilities where, if you did decide that you wanted Johnson Creek to really be a feature of Milwaukee, be a feature of the landscape, then you could really look at what zoning is going to be the most compatible. I mean, just as an example, if you have warehouses right up against Johnson Creek on either or both sides, is that going to be used? If that's a priority for Milwaukie, that they would like Johnson Creek to be used. I mean, we talked all about pedestrian paths and other things. You could take a look with that lens and say what zoning is going to be most likely to achieve the goals that you have for Johnson Creek. And, maybe it isn't warehouses or strict industry. I don't know. I'm not sure we really have an opinion on that.
Okay. Thanks.
There are setbacks that are required in our natural resource zones. So, I mean, whether they're enough is a question that you might want to weigh in on.
I think it all depends on what you or the council, whoever has in mind 20 years from now, what you want Johnson Creek to look like. Because if you do want it to be a corridor, transportation corridor, recreation corridor, whatever, it's got to be a lot more of a setback than you have for your natural areas.
But I mean, I'm thinking they're 50 feet. But
the water quality resource area is defined.
Yeah, 50 feet probably isn't going to be enough if you want to have a bike path or a pedestrian path or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. Just another unrelated question I just have to ask. In the community service use or whatever it's called, there isn't anything listed in there about charities and nonprofits. Did you foresee that would be covered somewhere else?
I think we'd consider that an institutional use, I think,
Okay, but schools and other things are not considered institutional uses?
No, it's in the same section.
There are multiple categories of community service uses, and schools are called out differently than institutions are. Mm-hmm. So charities, nonprofits, and so on would be considered as an institutional use, but those would be part of the umbrella of community service uses.
I think it's an interesting point you just raised, though. I think it's something we missed here. We'd probably call it an office.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I'd call it.
Okay. It just seemed like there were a lot of other things that were broken out there.
Yeah.
Just didn't want to make sure that charities or nonprofits would be prohibited uses.
No. I mean, certainly that would be considered an office.
I think we'd look at it as an office use.
Yeah.
Mr. Stark, would you like to make your comment?
Well, I appreciate there's a lot of discussion about the concern of employment, and I think that we'd all agree that sat on the committee that was the primary goal. But when you have property that cannot be developed for employment use, and it will essentially become sterile because the building will have to be taken down, the question is, what do you do? So here's an opportunity to actually, you've got a property owner in hand that's ready to develop. And we talk about catalysts, and we talk about the ability to create synergy. And is willing to do it on the site and have employment. He wants to have the mill and store in that location. It might be smaller, whatever, but he wants to have that, and maybe some of the retail components. It just seems to me it's kind of a no-brainer. I'm baffled why City Council opposed it. During the NMIA meetings, there was support by a number, at least a third, probably more, on the committee that agreed that putting mixed use at this location made a lot of sense. So it was when it went in front of City Council that it was dismissed. And again, the choice is simple. It's no employment eventually, or some development right now.
Can you throw up that timeline again? So it doesn't go back to council until 12/19?
Right.
Right now, that's how we have it.
So in other words, if we give you direction of that we would like the MUTSA in that lower left-hand corner, then you create a whole bunch of, well, I guess the code would still match, right? So does it really matter?
That's right.
Does it really matter until you get to the end when it goes to the council work session and they say, what the heck were you guys doing? Right?
But I said we'd develop a two-track process.
Right. What I don't want to do is I don't want to create a bunch of work that doesn't need to be done if it's just going to be. No. So my question, my follow-up was been to be, if it's going to create that work, it would be nice if we could ask that question of council beforehand to say, hey, are you going to reject it or not?
We could do that. We could definitely do that. But I would say that depending on how we approach it, it may be a lot of work to make that fit. It may be not that much work to make it fit. And is it a third zone in the district? Is it an overlay that adds housing? Is it the MUTSA repeated? I don't know what would be the best way to suggest it, but you could also... The
only difference between I want to make sure, the only real difference between the MUTSA and the NME is the availability of residential housing.
That's one of the biggest.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference.
Do we, and then limiting of some warehouse distribution?
There's some retail, some service uses and things that are easier up in the MUTSA.
Okay. All right.
Like Mill Ave would be.
So if it doesn't really matter, in your guys' work, right, we can make a recommendation at except then we go into public hearing, don't we?
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
I mean, regardless of what we do,
we would come in with so if we decide that the MUTSA should be in that lower left-hand corner, at the end of our public hearing number 2, we would actually say that MUTSA is in that lower corner, and then it would go to council, and then council may just kick it out anyways.
Right.
But does it cause a bunch of extra work?
No, I don't think it has to cause a lot of extra work unless we decide we want to do something drastically different there than is in the MUTSA in the northeast.
Is anybody thinking anything drastically different in the MUTSA?
I think it makes sense to just use that zone. I mean,
I do too.
Okay, all right.
And that's been my thinking.
I'm right there with you. And Commissioner Travis was right on the same.
Thinking too.
Right on the same. So,
okay.
Then we'll proceed that way. If
that's okay, if that doesn't cause a bunch of...
Well, if we catch something out of it at the council level and they're willing to go with it, we can kind of make some adjustments too.
All right.
And then it kind of changed the subject. Would it be possible to explore opportunities, to look at the riparian buffer and, in the NMAIA plan where it calls out Johnson Creek to find ways to do more to call out Johnson Creek? And I don't know what that would look like.
I'm right there with
I'd
you.
like to
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Public hearings.
Right. But let's save the watershed first and then...
Made notes to figure out what that might be, but yeah.
Right, and things like building heights and that kind of stuff. And I'm assuming that maybe a counselor might bring in bird protection, but I'm not going to force that issue.
Don't go there.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Sorry, we don't mean to cause. Thank you, public, too, for
a great
testifying and stuff. We certainly do appreciate it.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for taking us.
That was good.
Thank you.
All right, Denny, you're up. One more thing.
Okay, one more thing. We have a joint work session with the council next week. If more than just Greg can come, that would be great.
I'll try. I'd love to.
I think we're like 5 o'clock-ish.
Okay.
Is that in a work session or is that in a regular council meeting?
Work session.
Okay.
I would love to be there. I'm traveling for work next week.
I'll have to see childcare issues.
Okay. Well, I'll send a notice out to everybody again because not all of we're down to below a quorum now, but I'll get that notice out. So this staff report basically highlighted some of the things we did. This is the same staff report that's going to council. But I think the main things highlights the projects that are on our plate right now, and there's a lot on here.
You got a lot on your plate.
The thing that I have been unable to start is this annual code maintenance, which I would really like to do, but it's just been hard to get it started. The cottage cluster study hasn't begun quite yet.
But that's one of the council goals, correct?
No, well,
or is it?
Affordable housing is.
Thank you.
But we got a grant from Metro to do this cottage cluster study, which could have some code recommendations out of it. The Willamette Greenway update, I'm hoping to get a grant for that. It'd be really cool to get the grant and then have somebody help us with that mapping, kind of fixing that whole issue there. And then comp plan update's going to be a huge thing for us. So those are the main projects. We've got current planning stuff that's coming. The Milwaukie High School submitted their application today. It's going in a 30-day review period, and then we'll set hearings. Letting libraries, hoping to get something in the end of the, I think, beginning of the year.
So I have two things that I would like to add to our list. Mm-hmm. And one is a historic sign standard.
Okay.
And then the other one is it's a little harder to state, and so I'll give you background. I believe that...
Before you go there, what do you mean by historic signs?
So that if you wanted to put a historic marker somewhere, even if it's privately held and bought, that we have a size and a design.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
And then, and I actually believe Vera has 3 samples that were emailed to her that can help you kick off. And then you could actually even have the DLC make this one of their projects, and maybe even them be determines of if it's yay or nay on if you can put a historic sign in front of there. And then the other thing is that I believe that our role of planning commissioners, right, is to use the codes that are put in front of us, listen to public comment, but also understand the objectives and the goals of the city to be able to make our decisions. I think that some of the decisions that we have made, we have looked at these goals and we've used them as examples, but as they get through the process, we are not quite understanding what the goals are. And so I realized that I just found out that the Climate Action Plan hasn't even been written yet, but I thought it was adopted off of the Visionary plan. So the Climate Action Plan actually isn't even written yet. So, and I don't know if anybody really knows what the definition of affordable housing is. So my answer is a better understanding of council goals. And with that, that means review of things that we've reviewed that then council reviews. And just a quick summary of what they came up with and why they came up with it. And that if they ever come up with a land use goal or a land use, I don't know what you would call it, a project or something, that we would just be told about it.
Okay. No, that makes sense.
Does that make sense to everybody? The historic sign thing is just kind of a...
Yeah, it does.
It does.
So I think a little bit of that, it falls to staff. I mean, what we could do is Alma could talk to you about the work plan for affordable housing, or one of us could, but I mean, that's her project. The Climate Action Plan, Peter Passarelli, our new Public Works Director, is the staff person in charge of that. We could have him come in, and I think he'd be able to outline that. The third council goal was Milwaukie Bay Park.
Right, which I don't know if that we really need to care about. Like I said, if it's a land use issue.
But there's very well could be affordable housing programs, strategies, and suggested code amendments that come out of that work that we're not close to being done yet.
Right.
There could be, with the Climate Action Plan, there could be planning related things that come out of that. We're not there yet. So, and the workflow for the comp plan had places where those things hopefully plug in. But it's like 9 months from now or 8 months from now.
But like I said, it's just like the NMIA discussion. It'd be nice after that they do a review that we get a 2-minute speech of, hey, this is why council did, so that we learn ourselves, oh, well, maybe housing isn't as important as what they think there is, or that instead of us just saying, oh, well, they don't believe in housing, that we have an answer, right? That we have an answer.
No, I think you need a briefing of those things, so that's good.
And just only land use issues. Anything else doesn't really matter, but that's all I had.
I like it.
We need to carry on the minutes because I forgot to do them while Kim was still here, so we need to carry those on for the next meeting. Planning Commission Committee, or Planning Department, other business updates?
I think we're tired.
Do we have a candidate for commissioner?
There's 3 people that have applied right now, and 2 of them are outside the city limits, and I think we were trying to wait to see if we could get one more inside. So if you know anybody that would be a good candidate, encourage them to apply.
Outside the limits, but in the nascent community?
I think one might be in the UGMA and one outside the UGMA.
All right.
And our bylaws do state that you can have 2 people outside.
You can have 2 outside. But, we've had a lot of strong candidates from inside recently. There's been a lot of interest in planning. So I think with a little bit more outreach, we might be able to get another candidate. We had 67 people apply for the Comp Plan Advisory Committee. A number of them were from outside the city limits, but still, there's a lot of interest out there right now.
And the number will be 14? Is that?
It was 15 is what's being proposed, not counting the liaisons. Kim and the council members would be liaisons.
Got it.
So,
Planning Commission. Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. It really is. Planning Commission committee updates and discussion items? Any? I don't have any. Denny, I am surprised you did not take the opportunity to pat yourself on the back, so I will do it. Congratulations for your reward or your award on the Visionary Comprehensive Planning process.
Well, we haven't got it yet.
Are you an APA nominee?
At the end of the month, we get an Oregon APA award for outstanding public involvement process.
Great.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Nice.
So it was a great process. You guys did an excellent job.
It's a good thing you got the consultant firm when you did, because they dissolved.
They did.
And Vera, I'm glad that you're back so that you can teach Denny how to use the computer next time. All right.
You don't know how many times I go ask her how to do stuff.
All right. Anything else, guys?
Well, I saw this sign on Bernard's Garage. There's another hearing scheduled, and I heard through the grapevine there'd been an appeal.
Appeal hearing, yeah, it's coming up.
Next Tuesday, the 17th.
That's the 17th. Oh, so that's the same night. Then, yeah, that's right.
Brutal.
It is brutal. Yeah, so they're basically appealing the 6-foot setback variance that we allowed.
And council will just make a decision, and that would be final.
Yeah.
Well, he could go to LUBA, right?
Or they could remand.
Well,
if he has a case after city council.
Yeah, he could appeal to LUBA.
Right. Okay. But that's basically on a technicality or.
We don't know which way it's going to go, though. But
right.
Yeah. Either one could go to LUBA.
But yes, no, there's another step after that.
Okay.
All right, I think that's it. I'll take a motion. I only got 2.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, moved by Vice Chair Argo, seconded by Commissioner Burns. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Done.
Thank you.
I don't think we have